And also, I'll be joined in the studio by Dr. Felicia Stoller. She has some tips on how you can avoid all of those unhealthy trans fats in your diet. So hold tight. That's all coming up in just a moment. All right, 267-1023 is the talk line. Brian Joyce, once again, that is my name, and my guest in the studio right now is a registered dietitian and nutritional consultant. Her name is Dr. Felicia Stoller. She's written a couple of books on this. She used to host a show on TLC called Honey, We're Killing the Kids. Yikes. And she's in Chattanooga today with some tips on how you can avoid trans fats in your diet. So, Dr. Stoller, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure for having me. Thank you so much.
This TLC show, Honey, We're Killing the Kids.
Yeah, I know. Pretty extreme.
Is it as extreme as we fear it is? Are we putting so much stuff into our bodies and our diet that is really unhealthy for us?
Well, we have options. That's really what it comes down to. And the reality is there are healthier options. You know, there are better for you options. And then there's the traditional stuff that we think of that is junk. So the question is, which do you buy and which thing do you eat?
It's also, is it me or has it become, I know we have new labeling rules and regulations and things like that, but it also seems to me that it's become increasingly complicated to figure out exactly what you're eating. Because sometimes, too, even if you are a label reader, sometimes the labels are so long. I mean, you need an attorney with you just to...
And you need magnifying glasses because the font has just gotten ridiculously small. Exactly. You just can't even read it if you wanted to. Yeah.
So
but then, again, something that we were going to talk about today, which is fat.
Right.
It's that, you know, people were so busy looking at total fat. Then it's like, look at saturated fat. Now we're like, hey, let's get rid of trans fats.
This is where it all gets confusing. And I do want to talk about fats and trans fats in a minute here. But, you know, kind of expanding on what you're talking about right now is that, you know, everybody, it seems like everybody in the last 15 years has become sort of like a armchair dietary expert, okay?
Yeah.
And some of them tell you, well, if you want to lose weight, then you got to avoid the carbs. And then others say you got to avoid the sugars. And then others say you got to avoid the trans fats. And and everybody's on a different diet, whether it's South Beach or this one or that one.
Paleo or whatever. Right. Yeah. I mean,
so what? I don't know.
Shut your pie hole. That's what I say.
So in a nutshell, in 30 seconds or less, what should we be eating and what do we have to avoid at all costs?
Right. So it's basically eat food close to the way it's found in nature, eat more plant-based foods, eat smaller portions of animal protein, watch your fat intake, have moderate fat intake, and it's not just the food, folks, it's called get up and move, be physically active. And the other thing, too, is get enough sleep because people really don't appreciate how important sleep is. You burn the most fat for fuel when you're sleeping. Yeah. So if you're spending less time sleeping and more time eating and doing other stuff, you're not burning enough fat.
Let's talk about the trans fats. Now, just a couple of months ago, I think it was, the FDA announced some new rules and regulations on this. And your thoughts, explain what those new rules and regulations are, and explain your thoughts on that. Do you think that it will be effective?
So what happened was there was a loophole in the food labeling law. So something that had at least 0.6 grams of trans fats could say that it had 0 grams of trans fat on a label. So for people that don't know what trans fats are, it's basically how we take something that's otherwise a liquid at room temperature and turn it into a solid, a.k.a. margarine, right, or other sort of fatty lard type of, you know, products. So that was developed as a way of preventing food from spoiling. If you used a fat like that, it improved the shelf life of it and it wouldn't go rancid quickly. So,
well, the two biggest no-nos that we hear about so often, my guest here, Dr. Felicia Stoller, she's in town for one day just with some tips on how you can avoid trans fats and other unhealthy items in your daily diet. The two big red flags that we always hear about is, number one, the trans fats, and number two, corn syrup. That's the other one, high fructose corn syrup. We all hear about that. So are the two, first of all, are the two interrelated at all? And secondly, I mean, I know neither one of them is very good for you, but which needs to be avoided more?
The trans fat's definitely more. I think making better for you choices when it comes to fat. So, you know, we know that olive oil, for example, is a great oil. It's a monounsaturated fat, but it can't go in every food. So there are other oils. So if you remember maybe back in the 90s, if you're old enough to know that.
Oh, yeah.
Remember
that's
that.
right.
Okay.
That's right. I'm 38.
Okay.
I grew up. So, I'm a Gen Xer.
Yeah. So the Center for Science and the Public Interest told people to stay away from movie theater popcorn because they said it had palm oil in it, but it had palm kernel oil in it. But what we found is that there's another kind of oil that comes from a palm plant called palm fruit oil, which you'll actually see if we were to take out a bunch of packaged foods and a lot of the newer spreads or something like Smart Balance or Nutella, is that they've substituted in palm fruit oil, which is more, it has a neutral flavor point, and it's got more of a buttery taste to it so that you can use it in more applications. And a lot of food manufacturers, when they took the trans fats out, they put the palm oil in. So, part of what I want people to understand is palm oil is not like the palm oil from 20 years ago. So when you see it in Smart Balance, what we know about it is that it has the right blend of saturated fats to polyunsaturated fats to be cardioprotective. It's neuroprotective because it contains something called tocotrienols, which is very potent vitamin E, and it's also very orange in color when you look at it, and that is because it has beta carotene. So you could look at oils as like just oil, or you could look at an oil that has something else to it. Like we always talk about having foods that are nutrient rich. So there's definitely more to it, and it is, at least in Malaysia, it's grown sustainably, but it does come from other places in the world.